provincial PSW standards and supportive policy documents. Sara is the former Director of Policy at the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario and is a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto's Health Institute of Health Policy, Management and Evaluation. Welcome, Sara.
Well, I just feel like we've had a tag team here because the first group was talking a lot about the expanded role of PSWs and where I could go with that. The second group lady was talking about the barriers we have to access of PSWs and how they can get access to information. And now when we know what PSWs can do and how they need to access information, I'm so glad to be talking about personal care best practice guidelines, actually a source of information for PSWs and actually policies that will help move that towards implementation. I'm going to pick up this thing here. Now, I have to tell you, I am not, that bio that I gave to you is a little bit dated. If you were expecting Miranda Ferrier to be here with the Ontario Personal Support Workers Association, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, what we've decided to do is the National Association is taking on the development of the BPGs, the best practice guidelines, and so that's why she's not here today. But I'm sure those of you who have heard Miranda speak will be disappointed because she's always an interesting person to listen to. It's a great day to be an advocate for PSWs, I tell you. Oh, see, I did it as well. So the first slide was talking all about who is PCA Canada. So Personal Care Association of Canada is a very, very new group. So we are starting to develop national standards of care across the country about what PSWs are all agree that they should be doing. So it's developing those standards, and actually this is one of the products that you'll be seeing. It's developed for personal care professionals, personal care providers. That is the term that's being used across Canada. Of course, they're not always called PSWs. And also we plan to get some input from disability support workers and others who provide personal care. Because as you know, personal care really does, as it's said here in the slides as well, does really belong to personal support workers. That is their area of expertise. That is their area, hopefully, of research in the future. It's an area that I can speak as a nurse, saying nurses have typically left that arena. And in the past, nurses did a lot more research in personal care. Now when you do a search strategy, you don't find too many articles of people doing research on the basic care needs that PSWs provide care for. So what are personal care best practice guidelines? That's what this is all about. In developing these best practice guidelines, I had worked with PSWs, and this is one of the PSWs comments that she had when she worked at a long-term care placement as a student. And I think her remarks are very good. They resonate with me anyways. I hear the PSW with seniority repeatedly say, I have been doing it this way for 27 years. I watch her rush and disregard, patronize, disrespect, and invalidate the residents. And I think to myself, she has been doing it wrong for 27 years. And it speaks volumes, and it's amazing that that's someone who's just spent a little bit of time in that sector. And let me tell you that's not representative of all PSWs, certainly, but it's certainly out there because it's being experienced. So what we need is innovation. We need Plan, Do, Study Acts. We need to be focused on research and quality improvement. We need to be looking at Rogers' theory of diffusion of innovation and seeing how that fits in with communication styles for PSWs. How do we use social media to review best practice guidelines and evaluate them and make them better? So this is what this is. This is what we've provided. What are personal care best practice guidelines? They're a powerful communication tool, as Rogers' diffusion of innovation would suggest we do. Is used to standardize high quality, effective, and evidence-based care, to maximize cost and time efficiencies, to customize personal care best practice recommendations for each sector. Example, long-term care. The one example that you see today is for long-term care. And then to optimize the roles and responsibilities of personal care providers within the interprofessional team. And it's really neat to hear what the other presenters were talking about, because that is exactly what we've tried to do in this. We're trying to use the role of PSWs as assessors, as observers, and then to say, what is their role within the team? So you'll see that in the BPGs that I'm about to show you. This is an example of the BPG. I'm going to pass it around. And I'm going to start over here because I've given you survey questions and you haven't yet. So please read them. Please do not take them home with you. I need to ask you at the end to give them back to me. But they will be provided with the rest of the handouts for you when you look at this presentation online. There are two sets. One is a best practice guideline and one is a best policy template, if that's what you're trying to figure out. The best practice guideline will certainly go into the coaching role of PSWs, which has been talked about already. It looks at the coordinator role of PSWs, so it's looking at an expanded role. This particular aspect, this one here, is on mouth care, routine mouth care. So it looks at one aspect of activities of daily living. It doesn't do anything more than that. That is one BPG. So it is a BPG that PSWs can read very quickly, that a supervisor can say, hey, there's an area that I'd like you to brush up on. Here's the best practice guideline on it. It starts with the background. I'm sorry, you can't see it, but you're going to see it as it goes through. It starts with the background of why is this an important issue? With mouth care, certainly there's burning issues for this. And why are PSWs cutting corners on this? Part of the reason is that it's not visible. It's not socially important. And so again, you come back to the diffusion of innovation. How can we make it more important? Well, we give them a mouth care coordinator role. PSWs can do that. We give them an assessment tool so that they can actually observe and assess and write down, and my goodness, yes, write recommendations to the RN. And that is that, as you were saying before, that is the bottom-up type of care that you want to have. So PSW's eyes and ears are being used the most effectively. So it optimizes not only care and efficiencies, but also optimizes time. When PSWs look at this, I hope what they do is say, I don't agree with that. Oh, we never do that. Or this is a much better way. Why aren't they do it that way? PSWs love talking like that. I love talking about PSWs because they're brilliant. And they always come up with an even better way of doing it. Why? Because they've done it so many times. And they are the experts in it. So I want them to take this and say, I want to fill out the survey on this because this is all wrong. So we've got to take that feedback and revise this. This is going to be a living document. It'll be held on our website, and PSWs will be able to blog about it, providing their own input and saying, no, this is the way you do it. So what better way of facilitating a BPG than to also create a best policy template that extends the impact of the personal care BPG into organizational policy. So in the previous example of research, the institutional text, as she called it, was completely useless. It was completely disconnected from the care that was actually being provided. It was a failure of policy, if I can say. Because what policy can do, what a good policy can do, is actually make those connections very, very apparent and hold people accountable to saying, well, did you ask the PSW? Did you follow the policy which says you had to go to the PSW and get this? If those policies are actually required, then the DOC can go to the RN and say, well, did you follow this? Because now we've got this terrible abscess in the person's mouth. And if you had talked to the PSW earlier, would it have been prevented? And my goodness, do we not know that PSWs can prevent a whole lot of complex conditions that are going on in long-term care these days that actually result in hospitalizations? And boy, if Lynn knew that, they might want to put more money into PSW training, maybe. But BPGs are basically BPGs are the hand, and the BPTs, best policy templates, are the glove. And they work hand in glove together, and you have to work with them together because you can have a template and customize it however you want, and you can work with different roles and responsibilities you have in your organization. But what it's doing is it's effectively implementing the BPG. So they can be used as written, or they can be compared with an existing policy. So if you already have done a lot of work on BPGs in your organization and you just want to implement it into policy, review this BPT and say, yeah, this one that lines up with ours. No, this one doesn't. I disagree. What was her research? And you go back to the research that we did. You get looking at the references and you see exactly where we were going with this. And you see that it's referenced time and time again. We will only include them because they're only 2 pages long. We'll only include the reference in there if it's something that's happening over and over in the research. It's not just a one-off idea. So these are opportunities for organizations to really get hold of the new best practices in a particular care area. Oh, and I want to mention the disclaimer. As you see the policies going around and the BPGs going around, you'll notice there's a disclaimer. I do not take responsibility if you implement this in a way that isn't supposed to be happening in your home or is not customized to your home's needs. So I just want to be very clear on that. It is a knowledge document that you can use as you see fit. But again, these BPTs really do speak to, I want to pick up on a few notes that you spoke to as well. A lack of central policy is very common in organizations, or a very dated policy. So when actually some of these policies are coming from a home that I used to work for. And what we did in that home was we took 20-year-old policies and we said, are we actually doing this? I took a whole group of PSWs and I said, this is really important that we have our policies up to date and that they actually reflect what you're doing. Can you please tell me if you're still doing this? Is this what you call this equipment? Have you ever seen this piece of equipment that we talk about in our policies ever? And they'll tell me, no, we don't do any of that stuff. And then we talk about the process and they'll say, well, this would be much better. I've seen it work much better this way. And then say, well, do we all agree? Yes, we do all agree. And we'll put it down in our policy. And then we trial it, right? We want to put it back out on the floor, make sure that it all works with people. Then they give us feedback. So that's the process that should happen with a very effective best practice guideline and then a very best policy template. So that information is shared both ways. And again, so PSWs can make recommendations. So that is actually in that policy template once it makes its way around. If you see the third page, it's a column, a series of columns there. It talks about the different roles that each of the different people in the care team play at the same time. So you have a role there for, I'm trying to remember the first role. I think it's there's a role for the PSW who's doing the regular work. There's a role for the mouth care coordinator who is a PSW who's using an assessment tool and is responsible for assessing high-risk residents, to identify high-risk residents, and then to say, okay, I've used this assessment tool, I know who they are, I want the RN to be seeing this. So then they give the list of high-risk residents who need oral care to the RN, and then the RN does monthly assessments, or as needed. So that care is followed up on, and you have a tool to do that, and you have a role and responsibility list to do that. So everybody's lists of responsibilities are all in one key document. And then the other care team members can say, okay, I know that's your role. And I know you should be doing that because I depend on you to do that. Or I didn't know what you were doing before, but now I understand. It's not written out in prose. It's written out in a nice concrete chart. This format, and you'll see that there's questions being asked as opposed to statements being made. This format was what we proposed with PSWs. They said we should just have one chart that tells everybody what their role is together on the same issue, same task. So that's what we did. So how are the BPGs and BPTs developed? They were developed with a very particular checklist in mind. This is a very strong methodology for developing checklists. I won't go through the whole process with you, but we did keep this in mind as we were developing it. In fact, the first one, Focus the Checklist Task, is where we did most of our work. I'll give that as an example of what we did for our oral health BPG. So this is focusing the checklist task. What we did first was to define the content area as mouth care and to use it as routine. So this wasn't dealing with some specific issue or specific circumstance with someone who had a brain injury. No, this is routine care. It's mouth care. That's it. So we met with PSWs from home care, hospital, long-term care to discuss their training, their experience in mouth care. What were they doing? What were they trained to do? And then we conducted a search strategy using a librarian for all the articles pertaining to mouth care, long-term care, and personal care providers. My goodness, some of these strategies came out with 2 articles. It's unbelievable how little research is being done in this area. If you're planning on being a researcher, it might be something you want to do in the future. Then we reviewed the relevant literature, including previous guidelines. We engaged, held conversations with dental hygienists, experts in the area, and clarified, justified the criteria to be met. The next steps for innovation using this guideline. What could be done to make this even more usable? So we're hoping to, in the next year, not within the next year, but over the next year, to create 52 best practice guidelines, because each of these require the research, but also they require PSWs to look into them. And what we want to do is actually create videos that will go online and say, this is how you do it. If you're having a PSW that has an issue with following procedure on a certain thing, you simply say, okay, can you please go and watch this video? It's a really good way of doing things. And then eventually they will be available for informal caregivers as well to build capacity and say, if you didn't know how to change that catheter bag, here's a video, you can just go and look at it. It'll show you all the steps. And of course, it's useful for interprofessional care providers and others who might not understand the role of the PSWs. Maybe they weren't a PSW or nurses aide before they were an RN. This is a great opportunity for them to see what they do. And then there's the potential for integration with electronic health records. So the British Medical Journal has this model of aligning BPGs with their electronic health record. Similar thing could be done. My goodness, a problem keeps coming up. Why wouldn't we put a BPG in the pathway for an electronic health record to say, here's the best practice in this area? So how does this apply to education and research? Well, evaluation and research will use exploratory methods, not confirmatory at this moment. It's all pretty brand new. It's not a lot of concrete RCTs out there. A lot of it's qualitative. So we're still looking at exploring the issues. Using the Plan, Do, Study, Act, we want to make sure PSWs are aware of the language that they need to speak. Sometimes it's just giving them the tool of saying, if you talk in these terms, you'll be able to be heard more. Your assessment will actually be perhaps resonate more with certain people. Social media, we talked about that before, blogging and the response to the BPGs. And the education, looking at curriculum revision, using best practices, continuing education, look at using webinar training, and skills fairs. Skills fairs are a wonderful way of introducing new BPGs, new best practices. As they want to show you their skills. They want to show off and say, wow, we can do this even better. I have found a better way of doing this certain type of care. They love doing that. So part of it is just giving them an opportunity to demonstrate their skills. It also gives the supervisors and the DOCs an opportunity to determine the competency. And of course, customized training, because sometimes it's not always routine care. Sometimes you have specific needs of your resident that require specific BPGs. So how do you access these BPGs and BPTs? Once they're developed by all these PSWs, and we're hoping to have input from across the nation of PSWs, not just Ontario, how would you get them? So corporate has access by yearly subscriptions. They provide access to all the BPGs and BPTs on a password-protected entry online. So the researcher and the educator would also have access, but because they're going to research and because they're going to evaluate these BPGs, they would have a free subscription. The only thing I ask is that they would write some peer-reviewed journals on this so that this is really getting out there, it's being evaluated, made better. I'm not suggesting my BPGs right now or these BPGs or BPTs are the be-all and end-all. This is a starting point. This is a call to action in some ways of trying to get access to knowledge and getting access to care for PSWs so that they can make them their very own. They can modify them and shift them so that their voice is all over this. It's not the administrator's voice, not even the government's voice. It is the PSW's best practice guideline for themselves. So that's why we would have researchers and educators have free access to that. And then personal care providers and informal caregiver access. They would have access themselves, but again, they would be paying for the yearly subscription. Personal care providers need to be understanding that they're having a professional responsibility to maintain their competence, and this is part of that role. We'd want them to also then become part of their professional association at the provincial level, because we aren't able to do that at the national level. So that's where we'd like to have access to BPGs and BPTs in the years to come. So if there's any questions, you can direct them to me at this point. There's my email address there. There's a survey. I'm hoping that you can have a chance to fill out. Where are the BPGs and BPTs, just so I know? Where did they go? Oh, they're still there. Okay, so everybody's reading them intensely. That's a good sign. But they might not make their way all the way around. So the people that received a survey questionnaire, if you don't receive it, you can be looking for them online eventually. So then if you want to access obtain access to the BPGs and BPTs. Leave your contact information, and I will certainly do my best to make sure you have access to those following the conference. And then that's it. Thank you.